Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching and listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Look, it's a tough, maybe the toughest job market ever for CRAs, but it's really a market of two extremes at the CRA level. You are either highly sought after right now, which at one extreme, or you're in the majority where you don't have that much experience or any and you've got to battle it out. And it's still possible to get jobs. And the market, remember, I don't know which philosopher taught me this, probably a combination of all of them, but tough times don't last, tough people do. And I always, this is something as I've gotten more mature, I always keep in mind during good times or bad, whatever kind of time we're experiencing, whether it's good, this too shall pass, and whether it's bad, this too shall pass. And fun fact, if I were to get a tattoo, it would probably be that. And I'm not religious by any means, but I would get that Bible verse. I believe it's Bible verse, at least somewhere on my body, because it's that important. No matter what the state of the job market, economy, personal life, personal situations, family situations, this too shall pass. And matter of fact, we all will be past one day too. So hate to be a doomer and gloomer, but this video is about cracking the CRA interview code. So it's to give some hope out there. These are tough, even in good markets, these are tough. I've been through, I would say about 20 different CRA interviews personally, like as the candidate. I had a 5-year stint in between a few sites over a decade ago where I was a contract CRA and I worked for a very interesting group out of Maryland, and they specialized in Korean studies with Korean sponsors, and they needed a West Coast presence, and I was their boy, right? And this was before they hired a bunch of full-time staff. Now they have full-time staff, but proud to be affiliated with them during that time. And I've been through very tough job interviews. And entry level candidates fumble basic questions. I remember two job interviews in particular where I was nervous, and I'm this clinical trials guru. I'm the one making all these videos and giving people advice. And this was one of my first CRA interviews. And I remember I was getting interviewed by two people at the biotech company. And one would ask questions, I would answer. The other would ask another question, I would answer. The other. It just nonstop, like not even room to breathe or think. They were just rapid firing questions with specific questions like, what do you do with a temperature excursion? What do you do in the case of a deviation with elevated liver enzymes? What do you do? I mean, they were getting very specific. And that's when I realized this is going to be tough for a lot of people if they're not prepared and if they're not experienced. Now, you don't need that much experience as a CRA to do well. You just need to know the fundamentals. Now, the current job market is not favorable for non-experienced CRAs, but from some of these sites and as some of these sites evolved into site networks, the QA roles are essentially CRA roles, so there are some transferable skills, but I've interviewed former CRA recruiters. I've been the candidate on at least 20 of these interviews. I know what the hiring managers really want. We've interviewed some on the pod too. And this video will give you the inside edge, hopefully, especially on questions that make or break candidates. And yes, there are tons of those sprinkled throughout. So, the first thing you got to do is understand the interviewer's perspective. Put yourself in their shoes. They have been interviewing people who knows how long now. They're probably going through 100, if not 1,000 candidates to get one or two positions filled. And I'm not saying they're interviewing all 1,000, but they might be interviewing dozens to get one or two. And what the job interviewers really want, what they're really looking for, they really want to know three things. And there's obviously tons of things and almost infinite things that they're looking for. But to break it down to make it simple, can you monitor a site independently from day one? Can you go monitor a site independently? If we hire you today, can you go tomorrow? Can you jump on the plane and go tomorrow? And a trouble site at that. Number two, that was my situation when I was the CRA. That was literally my job. I would get hired a week later. You have to go visit the site. They're behind on a bunch of data entry and all kinds of stuff. So that's number one. Can you monitor a site independently? Number two, can you manage protocol deviations diplomatically? So if you've got a troubled site, they're probably committing deviations and not reporting them and not following the right process. Maybe they don't even realize they have deviations. And then number three, will you be a nightmare to train or a breeze to onboard? This could be tough. And I would add a fourth one. This is a bonus one, but I think it's critical and I actually think it's interwoven or embedded within what they're looking for. Your attitude. Do you have a positive attitude? Do you have a EQ, high EQ, which is emotional intelligence when it comes to working with sites? Because you're going to need site influence like you've never seen before. I tend to do pretty well on the EQ scale, and I had a hard time as a CRA, and this is with heavy site experience, having coordinators complete their action items. I know two particular sites in general, but one was a private clinic that really was up my alley. Like this was my entire background is running these small private sites. And they would just would they would leave action items open. I mean, it would be like three, five, six monitoring visits, the same action items open. So this would be like a star situation, which I'm going to get to in the next section. But those are the four things. Okay. Can you monitor a site independently? Can you manage protocol deviations? Will you be a nightmare to train or a breeze to onboard? And do you have high emotional intelligence for the sites when it comes to sites? Now, tough categories, protocol knowledge under pressure. This is when I was getting bombarded in my job interview, and there was no protocol for me to know during an interview. But they give you scenarios, and we're going to get to the STAR method right now. And they give you site relationship management hypothetical scenarios, and they give you ethical gray zones, and they figure out how are you at prioritizing during multi-site crises. Multi-site crises. And this is what they want to know. And they want to know, is this a problem solver? Are you a problem solver? Are you just going to give them more problems? Or are you just going to contribute to the chaos? Are you going to do nothing but just take up space? Or are you going to actually get stuff done? And today in a 2025 and a 2026 world, more than ever, the CROs, the sponsors, they need people that get things done. Now, the STAR method, situation, task, action, result. Strong candidates, when you get asked these kind of questions, what do you do in this situation when there's been a temperature excursion, but the drug has been assigned? Or what do you do when the consent form has not been filled out properly, but the site went ahead and randomized? They're looking for you, instead of rambling, they're looking for you to know the STAR method, situation, task, action, result. For example, they might ask you something about what have you done in the past where a PI was late or a site was late submitting SAEs. Or they may give you an example. You give them an example of a situation that you took action and you had a result. And then you'll hear the triggers. You'll say, okay, it's star method. They want the star method. I remember watching this on Dan's videos. Situation, task, action, result. So a bad answer would be rambling with no resolution. A strong answer would be something like a PI was persistently late submitting SAEs. That's the situation. I was tasked with improving compliance before the sponsor flagged us. That's task. You can even use the word task in your answer. I developed a simplified reporting cheat sheet and held a one-on-one with the coordinator. That's the action. And SAE timelines jumped from 54% to 97% in 6 weeks. That's the result. That'd be a strong answer. So you're going to get a lot of these navigating specific challenging questions. Tell me about a time you failed. This is where you can come up with a star situation. The reason why job interviewers ask this question, tell me about a time you failed, is they want to know if you own your mistakes and grow from them, or if you're one of those people that said, no, I've never failed in my life. Uh, they want to see a couple of things: humility and willingness to learn, and adaptability, so learning from mistakes. And they want to see details in your answer. So if you answer something vague like teamwork or just a bunch of corporate jargon, that would be kind of what they normally hear all the time, and you would not be a standout candidate. But if you hear, tell me about a time you failed, and you bring up something like, I had a one site that was not signing off on their SUSARs, their suspected unexpected serious adverse reports. First of all, just by saying that acronym, acronyms are like the passport of competency, right? Just everyone hates them, but they're kind of like proof that you know what you're doing as if you're using it in the right context. Or you might bring up something else specific. I had a site that missed their IRB renewal, and I missed this as the CRA. And we had a huge deviation. And how I learned from that was I figured out a tool. I use a tool, whether it's internally by the sponsor or one that you create, Monday.com, for example, or what's the other one I use? TickTick.com, or just an Excel tracker where I started putting these things with alerts for me. So I start getting alert notification a month before the site is expired. So I learned from this. So my situation was the site that I was in charge of monitoring missed their IRB renewal. It was my task in that point to develop a plan for that site. So you can do a CAPA plan, corrective action, preventative action, another great acronym they would love. And furthermore, I created a task in the form of this trackers where I would get alerts, and now it's integrated in my workflow of how not to miss important dates such as PI license expirations, IRB renewals, CLIA waiver expirations, GCP expirations, IATA expirations, etc. And so that's the action. And then what's the result? Since then, I've not had this happen with 25 sites or 25 studies, however many the truth is, right? That would be a strong candidate answer. A weak candidate answer would be I honestly haven't really failed in this role. So, strong candidate again, you can embed the star method here, where you just talk about the mistake, you recognize the lapse, you created a solution, and what was the result? The next question they love asking is why should we hire you? And here's what they want. They want a synthesis of your background plus what you solve for the company. Not what a hypothetical person would solve, what you specifically would solve for this company. This requires some kind of study, a previous study of this company. And if you know they do non-small cell lung cancer and you actually have some experience with that, you bring it there. You bring it to that, even if you have site experience. Or if it's a metabolic disease company and you have metabolic experience, either as a coordinator or research assistant, whatever, you bring it. Those details matter. It shows that you connected the dots, you did your homework. Do you realize how many people go to interviews without knowing a single thing about the company they're interviewing for? So this is taking it the next level. So they want to see your background and how it fits into solving specific problems of that company, which you obviously won't know the problems, but if you know enough about the context of that company, you can know enough to kind of guess where some of their challenges are if you have some experience. So, for example, I bring 3 years of oncology experience. I have handled high enrollment sites, and I'm confident managing complex EDC systems and other vendor portals. But more than that, I'm known for my site relationships, for my EQ. In my last study, our site was top enrolling thanks to strong collaboration. That's good, right? The more specific, the better. The more vague, the more you're like everyone else. So again, what makes you unique? Another candidate's answer cannot possibly be yours. That's a strong answer. If your answer sounds like it could have been anyone else's in that pool of candidates, that's a weak answer. The next question they always ask, this one is almost always asked. These next two, no, this one's always asked, and then I have another one that's always asked. So, how do you handle a PI who refuses to follow the protocol? So this tests your soft skills, your EQ, emotional intelligence, regulatory knowledge, your ethical framework, and how you handle conflict. So a strong answer would be first, I'd document the deviation, then I'd schedule a calm conversation to understand their rationale and re-educate them on the protocol's intent. This will be documented. I'd escalate only if there's continued non-compliance. I will retrain that PI. I will document that retraining. And then you could give an example, maybe from a site, maybe how in whatever realm you have something similar. I once had to involve the sponsor after a PI prescribed a prohibited con-med, and we handled it respectfully and transparently, and we did a retraining. If it were more than one situation like this, we did a kappa plan. These are the kind of answers they want. Number four, what are your salary expectations? This is always a tricky one. Even for me, this one has always been tricky for me. I've always gone fair end of high for me, but I use my experience as a barometer. If you're less experienced, you can't go fair end of high. And you got to know what those things are, by the way. So here's what they want to know. Someone who's done research but won't price themselves out of the job or undercut their worth. So know your worth based on your region and your experience. And say something like, based on my experience in industry benchmarks, and you can quote certain specifics, I'm targeting X amount of dollars between X to Y, but I'm open to negotiation based on benefits and the role responsibilities. You want to then re-emphasize your interest in the role and how it goes beyond money, but how you are worth your weight in gold. And then bonus questions from real interviews that I've had. These are like real, and believe it or not, I've talked to during my role as a CRA Academy instructor and a CRA Academy co-founder, which we're still enrolling, by the way. Um, these three are very commonly asked. You're assigned 8 sites, or the number is always varies, but you're assigned a lot of sites, and 3 of them are overdue on query resolution. What do you do first? So this tests prioritization and resource management. Obviously, the first thing you do is you communicate with all 8 of the sites, but the 3 that are overdue on queries, you prioritize those. Or maybe instead of queries, it's deviations. You prioritize kind of like the Eisenhower matrix. I have an Eisenhower matrix here in front of me on TickTick, which I use to plan my tasks. Um, Urgent and important. So think of it as a quadrant, the Eisenhower matrix. Urgent and important, not urgent and important. Urgent and unimportant, not urgent and unimportant. So if a site has outstanding action items, or even worse, anything involving patient safety or data integrity, that is urgent and important. And you might even mention the Eisenhower matrix. You might get bonus points for that. Number two, a coordinator admits they backdated a consent. What's your next step? So, the job interviewers are looking for ethics, documentation, and escalation awareness. So, if I were a CRA and this was brought up to me, and these are tough in job interviews, but in a job interview, you would say, and this has actually happened to me as a CRA, believe it or not. We retrain on the importance of following ALCOAC standards and GCP. We emphasize that backdating is a violation of data integrity and it has no place in research, but mistakes do happen. We understand it was a lack of proper understanding of good clinical practice as well as site SOP. So you have the coordinator retrain, you have the site retrain the coordinator on the site SOPs. I would have another GCP, at least this element of GCP, trained and documented. And I would have a kappa plan put in place, corrective action, preventative action. And as far as escalation, you do document it in your monitoring report, and that's how you escalate it. That's at least how I escalated it in the past. But before I escalated it, I let the site know, hey, this will go in my report, but what we can do now is get ahead of the problem and start working on the kappa plan and the GCP training, and that's going to make the report look better than if you guys are still non-compliant. So it will look like you've remedied the situation already. And then number three, this is almost always asked in an interview. You just arrived at a site for a monitoring visit and the PI is unavailable. How do you proceed? So this tests flexibility, planning, and communication skills. This is actually very frequently of an occurrence if you've been a CRA. Um, so you do your monitoring visit, you do the source data verification, source data review, regulatory review, you do action items, you look at previous action items, you close them out, you close out queries, you do everything you would do, investigational product accountability, and then you try to have a phone call with the PI. And if not, you document. PI was not available. I did talk to maybe the sub-I was available, or maybe the site director. Somebody besides the coordinator would be good. Somebody in a position of authority at the site would be good. Ideally, we want the PI, but if only the sub-I is available, you talk to them. If only the site director, you talk to them. If only the lead CRC, you talk to them. That's how you proceed. Uh, and that's it. I mean, CRA interviews, these are really all about confidence, preparation, story-based answers, the STAR method, knowing what the interviewer really wants, remembering that they are doing this dozens of times a week and they hear the same canned BS answers over and over again, and you don't want to be that. You may not get the job, but you don't want to be in that category. You want to be memorable to some extent and practice your answers until they feel like second nature. So drop your toughest interview question in the comments below. I'll answer it personally. And if you found this helpful, subscribe and share somebody who may benefit from it. Good luck out there, Guru Nation. I'm rooting for you. Bye bye.